Hello and welcome to From Field to Skin, a series of interviews chronicling Ash Alberg's adventures in the Canadian fibre shed. Our inaugural episode features Anna Hunter of Longway Homestead and was recorded in December 2017 on Treaty 1 territory in eastern Manitoba. You can find Anna online at Longway Homestead on Instagram and Facebook or visit longwayhomestead.com. For more, follow at From Field to Skin on Instagram or visit fromfieldtoskin.com. But this is the first official interview for From Field to Skin, which is my adventures in the Canadian fibre shed. And so we're going to kick it off with Anna Hunter from Longway Homestead, which feels very appropriate because she is a very dear friend and lives close. So it's like my most local area for the fibre shed, and really kind of kicked things off. And Anna's like a pretty major reason why the Manitoban fibre shed is growing at the rate that it's currently growing, which I think is super exciting. And I just like the fact that I get to be biased and have her as my very good friend. So let's start off with you telling us a little bit about you and about your personal fibre journey.
Okay, well, I'm not from Manitoba originally. I come from Calgary. When I was about 18, I moved to Switzerland to become a nanny, and that's where I learned to knit. A very random moment where I just had to have this Austrian sweater, and the woman who was wearing it taught me how to knit. So my very first knitting project was this very elaborate sweater.
Amazing.
But that was the beginning of the end, I guess. After that, knitting was just something that kept my hands occupied during the hours and hours and hours of activist meetings that I sat through for most of my 20s and 30s, where I was involved in frontline activism, anti-poverty, homelessness activism on the east coast of Canada, and then also on the west coast in Vancouver. So after a lot of work in that field, I got a little burnt out and needed a break. And so Luke, my husband, was like, well, you obviously need to do something with knitting because that's the only other thing that you really care about other than anti-poverty work. So I decided to open up a yarn store in East Vancouver. Part of my motivation was I just wanted a yarn store in my neighborhood because there wasn't one in my neighborhood and it was hard to get to the other ones. And part of the motivation was I wanted to open up a store that sort of reflected my political and personal values around what safe space looks like, what resources I was going to sell. And just, you know, at that point in my life, I was a very punk-looking badass, and I wasn't really that welcome. It wasn't that I wasn't welcome in other yarn stores. They were just skeptical that I was in the right place. So I wanted to make a yarn store that basically felt good for people that had a similar experience to me and or didn't fit into the status quo. So Bad Anna's was born. And yeah, owning a yarn store was just a fantastic experience. I had never worked in retail, so that was brand new. You know, and I remember one of my best friend, Caitlin French, who's natural dyer and knitwear designer, and just fantastic artist. She was along with me during that journey. Started the store with me, was the manager of the store for 3 years. I remember the day before our opening, I was like, Caitlin, I don't understand how to do this retail computer system. And she was like, well, it's just easy. And she rattled some things off and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, wait, you've never worked in a retail store? I was like, never. So it was a big learning curve, but it was fantastic. And it was a real community-based shop. People, you know, from the neighborhood would show up and knit all day or just hang out, and it just had a really awesome community feel. My original plan when I opened the store was to have it be a sort of a similar 100-mile yarn store. But as I started doing the research, I very quickly realized that there wasn't enough fiber and yarn that was being produced, grown and milled and produced and whatever within 100 miles of Vancouver, which was sort of the first seed, I would say, to where we are today, because I was just really surprised. And then through the store, I met a bunch of farmers in the Fraser Valley and in the Lower Mainland, and all of them just said, yeah, like there's no market for our wool, which I just couldn't believe because there were so many knitters and the industry was growing so much. And I thought, you know, there really needs to be a connection between these urban knitters and spinners and dyers and all these farmers who are producing beautiful stuff but can't get it in the hands. But, you know, I was running a store and I had 2 babies, and so that just kind of went on the back burner. So after the 2 babies, we kind of realized we wanted a little bit more than what Vancouver could provide. So we sold the store and we moved to Manitoba. And that was in 2015, so just 2 and a bit years ago. And we found this land east of Winnipeg, 140 acres, mostly tree and bush. It's actually not, it's not great agriculture land. We fell in love with it because there was so much wildness to the property. We loved the forest, we loved the wetlands, we loved the biodiversity of birds and animals and species that are out in our land. So we found the land and moved in, and 3 days after we moved in, we picked up our first chickens. And we just thought, all right, we're doing this. Neither Luke or I had ever spent any time working on a farm, had never worked with livestock. But we had this desire to become closer connected to where our food was coming from, to have our boys have an understanding of that process in a different way, and to really reduce our footprint. We eat meat, so we wanted to, you know, be able to understand what that process looked like and also to have a connection. So got our chickens, and 6 months later, I was like, this is easy, we can do it. So, you know, I thought, you know, we'd move to the farm and we'd start with chickens and, you know, maybe in 5 years we'd start raising sheep. But I was just so motivated after keeping those chickens alive for 6 months, which is so full of, I don't know, ego or something, that I got a book out of the library on raising sheep, and again, had another conversation with Caitlin about what it would actually take to start a fiber farm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, capital and cash flow is a challenge for farmers doing at any scale. Mm-hmm. So we came up with this idea to do a Kickstarter to start the fiber farm and to build into the fiber farm a CSA, a community supported agriculture, or community supported fiber culture is what some people are calling it now, sort of model. So really engaging the knitters and the spinners and the weavers and the dyers who are in the city on what the process actually looks like. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that was the spring of 2016. Did the Kickstarter. It was wildly successful, which was amazing and encouraging. And I guess it was that August that we brought the first sheep home. So I started with a flock of Shetland sheep, and we've just grown since then. I guess it's been now a year and almost a half of having sheep. Mm-hmm. It's been a very incredible learning curve on this end of things, and I think raising sheep has informed my knitting and my expression of the fiber arts in a way that I never would have imagined. Just sort of realizing all that goes into, you know, what I'm working with. Yeah. Has really shifted my perspective. So very early on when we started with the sheep, and I was looking at the complexities of raising them, getting their wool sheared, and then getting it processed, mm-hmm. And realizing there was no processing mill in Manitoba, very huge wait lists and lengths of time that you have to wait to get your fiber processed in the rest of Canada. And then the complications of the dollar exchange going down to North Dakota. Mm-hmm. So Luke and I decided, well, we should just build a wool mill.
Perfect.
Yeah, just take it to that step.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's sort of where we're at right now in the fiber journey, is we're raising sheep, and we're in the spring going to be building a wool mill.
So exciting. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And the farm is called?
Yeah, and our farm is called Long Way Homestead. It's kind of funny how we came up with that name. It kind of reflects mine and Luke's personal, I don't know, ethos or whatever. It's, we could have just opened up a retail store, but we decided to open up a retail store and have 2 children immediately. And, we could have just moved 3 provinces away with our family and settled, but instead we decided to move 3 provinces, become farmers right away. We could decide to just, become farmers and deal with that, but we all also decided to become manufacturers immediately. So we kind of take this long, harder approach.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fitting for us.
Love it. So everything seems to keep on circling back to keeping things as local as possible, which makes a lot of sense considering your background and Luke's background. So Fiber Shed was a movement that primarily has its roots in California, which is very different from what a fiber shed looks like in the north, like up here in Canada. And southern Manitoba is going to look very different from what the fiber shed in Nunavut looks like. And that's something that I'm hoping from Field to Skin will be able to really look into and kind of expand that idea of what a fiber shed is. But what does fiber shed mean to you?
For me, it's a further extension of the values that I'm trying to live out in all areas of my life. In the purchasing decisions that I make, and in the food decisions that I make, and entertainment and work. What is it that I'm taking away or contributing that has the smallest impact on the land and the laborers, and also part of it is the pocketbook, right? What is it that I can do to have the least impact on all those ways? And so Fiber Shed, I think experiencing it in the north, or in Manitoba, which is a really different climate and environment than Vancouver, where we were. I'm realizing it's a spectrum, right? And it's not about making all the big choices immediately and living totally like off grid and eating only food that you've grown yourself and only wearing clothes that were manufactured with textiles here. But it's about making those small everyday choices within your own, realm of possibility. And that is part of privilege, right? Like the fact that I'm able-bodied and I can live on this land and I can grow vegetables and raise animals and then butcher them and eat them, and that I have the access to all of that. That's part of my privilege. And so that's kind of a part of the spectrum for me, is just making those choices that you can every single day. I think part of it is that there's sort of a hurdle, I think, with concepts like Fiber Shed, right? Like people weren't talking about it 10 years ago, and now we are. So now that we understand it, we've crossed this one hurdle, and the next hurdle is actually just having access to those textiles, to those fibers, to those things that have been manufactured locally. And that's where I'm really inspired by some of the other people across the country, especially like in Nova Scotia with Taproot, where they're like, they've just jumped over another hurdle that's like, we're all way behind them, right? But they've made that jump. And now they're trailblazing for all of those, and especially us here, where we can grow hemp really well and we can grow linen really well. And so it's about just like constantly pushing that envelope and making it more accessible to everyone. Yeah.
I think that's a really huge thing, that it's also starting to filter a little bit more into the slow fashion conversation, which is really nice, but something that often doesn't get addressed enough within really any movement in general is privilege, and having the capability and the accessibility of making decisions. So which isn't afforded to everybody for like so many different reasons. And my hope with Fiber Shed is that it's something that people don't go blaming or judging people who don't make the same decisions as them because for whatever reason. I think so long as people are learning about the values of what is going behind it and then make informed decisions, that is a much more useful conversation to be having than, oh, well, that person, bought something from Walmart. And so therefore they're a bad person. Like, that's not how it works. Um, but we reduce things a lot, and reduce things to very simple black and white situations. And I feel like the fiber shed allows for a much more gray look at things, and hopefully just continues.
Well, and I think it really is about connection, right? Because there is a gap. Like I saw it in Vancouver, and I've seen it here. There is a disconnect between the fiber artists that have access to the resources and want to make intentionally good choices. But then there isn't the product there. And then we have farmers that are really good farmers, and they are incredible at land management, and they're utilizing the land in a way that is healthy for our ecosystem. But they aren't sure how to get that product into the hands of those knitters. And definitely with projects like this or the Pembina Fiber Shed, there is that's the missing link. It's an opportunity to bring farmers together and say, let's get your wool into these hands, and let's tell these fiber artists why that's important and why that matters and how they can contribute. And I think once those networks are established and they become stronger, it also becomes more accessible.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we can jump ahead to, we were going to chat about this a little bit later, but you just mentioned the Pembina Fiber Shed. So let's talk about that, because that's a new project that or maybe not new, but it's something that you're currently working on, and will be launching soon. So do you want to talk about what that's currently at?
Sure, yeah.
I know it's baby stages, but
it is definitely a new project, not a new concept, but new for here. So Margaret, who was the founder of the Manitoba Fiber Festival, and I have been connecting and talking about how to establish a fiber shed organization. So an intentional place, virtually at this point, I suppose, to bring producers and dyers and sewers and textile artists and fiber artists together to focus on strengthening the textile production economy and manufacturing in the Pembina Fiber Shed. And we've chosen the Pembina River as sort of the geographical place marker, I guess, rather than making something like Winnipeg the epicenter. The river runs from eastern Saskatchewan all the way up through to Kenora, eastern Ontario, and we're doing a 200-mile radius from the Pembina Fiber Shed, or from the Pembina River. So it includes parts of Saskatchewan, parts of Manitoba, a little bit of western Ontario, and some even of North Dakota. And so it's a really big range, but it also, I think in the true sense of the word, we are all part of a similar watershed, which is sort of the initial concept behind Fiber Shed. We share a lot of similar geographical conditions. So when we're talking about carbon farming or regenerative agriculture or water waste and how we're doing these things, we are all dealing with the same types of circumstances. So we've created a website, and we will start organizing events and try to bring people together, bring producers together, and provide them with information on how to farm differently or in a way that is reducing our footprint, contributing positively to climate change by taking carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil, and then also supporting and promoting those folks that are doing natural dyeing, that are foraging or planting species that grow really well in our climate, and using that to dye textile and wool. yeah, so I mean, the project is really just starting, and I'm sure it'll form and look differently a year from now. But yeah, it's really about starting that conversation.
So I guess that kind of feeds in nicely. It's just so convenient how conversations naturally flow. But what do you think stops people from engaging with the fiber shed? Because this is all, we're talking about starting conversations, but why are people not already, like, it's not that the information is new, it's actually that we're returning to old information and traditional ways of working. So what is it that you think is stopping people, urban and rural, from engaging in their local fiber shed at this point?
Well, I think the answer, first of all, is different between the urban and the rural, but from the urban perspective, or the consumer perspective, I suppose. I just think it's something that people don't consider. Like, food, no matter sort of what your like economic status is, no matter what community you are from, there is now widespread awareness on eating locally.
Yeah.
Talking about organic or GMOs or local food or whatever, that's a conversation that has fed into the mainstream.
Yeah.
So much more now. People are more concerned about where their food's coming from or how far it has to travel to get there. So that's really mainstream. And I think the conversation about textiles is just not there yet.
Yeah.
People buy their clothing from Superstore while they're picking up their groceries and don't think about the labor and the resources that went into that. I think there's just a really big piece of information that's lacking.
Yeah.
And even people that make really incredible food decisions don't think about it the same way when it comes to their clothing. So I think that's a missing piece. And I think as far as the rural or the people that are farming, it's very, unless you have skills to manufacture a product that is relevant and interesting, then you can't make money at it. And it's really unfortunate. I think whether it's fiber farmers or livestock farms or grain farms or whatever, across this country, farmers are not being compensated adequately for all the work they do and the essential services that they're providing. And so we've seen a real big movement in like direct farm sales. People are raising livestock, pasture raised or grass fed, and selling that directly to consumers in the city, which has really shifted that conversation. But for people that are farming for wool, the best they can do at this point is sell their wool to wool growers. And right now in Canada, we're producing 3 million pounds of wool a year. 90% of that is being shipped through wool growers to places overseas where it becomes manufactured, where they mix all the wool up, whether it's like Rambouillet or whether it's, Suffolk or whatever. They're mixing it all together. It gets sent away. It gets manufactured with harsh chemicals and crazy processes and then turned back into either yarn or textiles or carpets or insulation and then shipped back to us.
Yeah.
And those farmers are getting 25 cents, maybe $2 a pound for that wool.
Right.
But that's just how it's always been. So to shift that perspective, to say like, actually your wool could be worth a lot more than that, but it requires all this extra work. So there's also a piece of education and also a structure in place to shift that dynamic. And I feel really hopeful that that's possible. And sometimes all it takes is just someone who's super excited about it to make that happen. And, Manitoba, in my limited experience in this province, is such a friendly place where people are really, they are easily excited about new ideas.
Yeah.
So I think that we could be a real leader across Canada in shifting the way that textile and fiber production happens.
Yeah. I think, I feel like one of the biggest hurdles often is going to actually end up being like at a later point in the process with the yarn, like with the dyers, it'll be a matter of convincing people that, this yarn, this wool it has this much worth, and this is what the actual worth is, and here's the process of doing, like, growing this wool and shearing and manufacturing and all of that. And so this is why you're going to pay that much for that base. And people will understand that. But then at the dyer level, you still have this kind of middle point of dyers understanding that that is worth it. And so it's worth paying the wholesale price to the grower in order to get that, or to the mill in order to get that base. And then for them to then put their labor on top of it and dye it. And then for the knitter from there to say, yeah, it's worth me spending twice or 3 times the amount. And obviously this takes people who have the financial ability to buy that to begin with. But to say, yeah, I'm going to spend that much on this one skein of yarn rather than getting 3 skeins of superwash merino that was dyed overseas by a really great indie dyer, and that, you know, came from whatever mill, whether it was in Europe or if it was in Asia, that then got shipped to them. And then they've dyed with acid dyes and then is going on from there, from their shop in whatever country. And yeah, for people to understand that all of those different things, there's so many decisions that get made along that process of, and so many reasons that have everything to do with ethics as well as ability, as well as access. So I think this is a really exciting starting point for, especially once the mill is up and running, for dyers to be able to start accessing things more locally and be able to at least consider that as an option of, you know, maybe it's a little bit more expensive than your yarn that you're shipping from the States, but now you know the source, you're not dealing with customs fees, you're not dealing with the dollar change. And you know what, raise your price a little bit more so that it's actually something that's reflecting what the global market is able to sustain. It's kind of incredible once you start kind of going down the line of, from the point where you've purchased all the way back to how did it start? Like, what did that lamb look like? And realizing all of the steps and all of the people involved in between, and you know, how are people being compensated all the way along? I think we hear Home Alone right now. That was great. Yeah. So, so what do you think is the first step that people can take to start engaging with their fiber shed? Then we've talked about, you know, what does the fiber shed look like? What are all the potentials for it? What are the things that are stopping people from engaging with it? What's the very first step that you could take to engage with it?
I think honestly the first step is to understand the process. Like, you know, it was, I had been a knitter for a decade before I even understood how the yarn that I was working with got from, like, I knew it came from sheep. But how did it get from there to here? And, you know, once I understood and researched that process, it you know, everything opened my eyes after that. I think the biggest important step is understanding that process. And then I think it's about making small choices in the beginning, right? Maybe it's not even necessarily about consuming only local wool. It's about consuming less in general. You know, and I know stash enhancement is such a big thing. And I mean, I don't want people to stop buying wool. That's how I support my family. But I would love to see, you know, a world where people purchase what they need rather than everything that they want. But, you know, maybe that means just buying 1 ball of local wool a year, or you know, maybe one project committed to making it out of local wool or naturally dyed. I mean, that's another one too, right? Is it, from an ecological perspective, looking at the way that natural dyes affect the environment differently than acid-based dyes, and the process involved, and especially when you're looking at it on a commercial level, the damage is way worse, including superwash, right? I didn't understand for a long time what was involved in making superwash wool superwash. Well, once you understand the chemicals involved and also how that just strips the amazing natural characteristics of wool, makes you think, oh, maybe I won't make that choice next time. So that's where I think it is. And you know, if people live in a place where there are sheep farmers, get to know your farmer. Go. I mean, we love having people out to our farm and visiting and taking them through the farm and meeting the sheep and learning about the process. But you know, for most farmers, they appreciate when people want to ask questions and want to understand, and then there is that connection to the animal that your product is coming from.
Yeah, perfect. So what's the next step for you?
The wool mill is definitely our next step. So getting that up and running. I have big plans in general, right? I want our farm to be a hub of textile production and fiber arts activity and learning and networking. So it's just a matter of balancing reality with time and whatever, one step at a time. But I think having a wool mill and being able to manufacture not only my own wool but the wool of other farmers in the province will have a big impact. It'll just be more accessible, right? I mean, I talk to farmers in this province all the time who either do nothing with their wool or they ship it off where it takes 18 months to get it back. So if we can shift that timeline, that will make a big difference in building a healthy, vibrant fiber industry and, you know, a small scale economy around that here.
Perfect. There's so much potential. That's just really, really exciting. So, final question. In your ideal world, and I know you like to think big, so this is a really exciting question to me to hear your answer. What would the fiber shed look like?
Oh, I mean, I have visions of reclaiming textile manufacturing in our province, like, you know, and maybe the country, but certainly our province, and you know, getting to a point where we can manufacture more than 50% of the textiles in this province, that we can redirect the wool and the other fibers that are being sheared off of animals in Manitoba directly to manufacturing facilities in Manitoba. And I mean, that's much bigger than like a small mill that I'm building, right? But if we can generate the consumer need for that, I think that the possibility is endless. And also moving it beyond just animal-based fibers, but also hemp and linen and those things that do grow really well here. I don't know, in my ideal world, that's how it goes, is we bring it back, supporting the farmers, supporting our laborers, and supporting a really vibrant fiber arts and textile industry.
I mean, there's so many people working within that, and there's so many local clothing designers. I think it will be really cool to have people being able to access fabric. Like, I think knitters have an easier time than sewers do at accessing fabrics that are, you know, where you can trace the source. And really trace it all the way back. So that's a really exciting thing to me, is something potential. And you know, when you can access it, it's super expensive. You know, like you want to make a wool cape and it costs you $450, and you don't necessarily know even what region the sheep came from. Never mind. So that's really, really exciting.
And I think it is totally possible. We just need to reframe the way we look at it, just like the way food has been reframed. So
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for making it happen.
Yeah, and we'll for sure do another update once the mill is up and running.
Yes, well, I hope you'll come back.
Coming off because there's a part where I don't like.
That is fair, and this is a perfect ending point for our conversation. We just finished chatting, so do you want to wave hello to everyone? No? That's okay.